All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Beamer, Director of Band and Orchestra here at West Music. We're very thrilled to have Tom Burritt with us today. He is a majestic artist, and we can't thank Majestic enough to help putting this class on. Obviously, between West Music and Percussion Source, we offer the full line of brands and everything like that. All the whole lineup that they have. Tom also has a great IP mallet line available. So we have a little bit of a promo going on at Percussion Source right now. Put some of those links in the chat a little later. Please feel free to check those out, later on. So introducing Tom here a little bit. Tom's professor of percussion at the Butler School of Music at the University of Texas at Austin. He's played on numerous CDs, done clinics all over the country and the world, and we just can't be thrilled enough to have him here today. So without further ado, Tom, go ahead, my man.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate that introduction, and it's my privilege to be here today, and thank you for offering this. And I too would also like to thank all my friends at Majestic and at KHS America for helping make this happen. Today we're going to talk about finding your innate musicianship. It's always difficult trying to figure out who the audience for these types of things are going to be. And so hopefully there's something here for everybody. Before we get too in the weeds here, I just wanted to say that everything shared today is simply my perspective and is offered with the hopes that it encourages everybody who's watching. It might get a little serious at times, and I'm sorry if that's not what you came for, but it's just offered with that sort of perspective in mind. So why is it important to find your innate musicianship? Well, I found this to be our best shot at success, okay? And whatever that success looks like, for many of us, it's a lot of different things, right? But if we think about, for example, winning a job, some kind of playing job or teaching job, the best musicians tend to get those, right? And so also, maybe even more importantly, the best musicians make the most impact on their listeners. So we have the practical side of just making money and writing, being successful in that way, but also like what are we saying to our listeners, and how are we impacting those who hear our groups or hear our performances? So to get things started today, I like to do this with my students. It's something that I think is important, and I try to do this too. And so I'll do this along with you today. But I'd like you to think back about a performance, or just any kind of experience, actually, a concert, a teacher you had, or a playing experience maybe that you'll never forget, right? Maybe it's one that made you realize that you had to get really serious about being a musician in whatever capacity that happens to be and why you're here today. So go ahead, I'll give you just a few seconds to think about that, just a few seconds to identify just one. We probably have many, right? But just think about one and just try and think about how that changed your life and how it made you feel in that moment. And if anyone's interested in sharing one, I'd love to hear that. I know we don't have a lot of people, and I think a lot of people will be hopefully looking at this later too. But if anybody wants to chime in with what that experience was for them, I'd love to hear it.
I'll chime in with an experience
Alex,
that I
thank you
had.
so
There's no
much.
problem with
Go
that.
for
So
it.
I had an experience. It was with my Steve Fiddick was my teacher at one time, and I walked into a lesson. I normally would come into lessons, very prepared, and I'd spend a lot of time driving to see him, all those things. Well, one time I came into a lesson, and I wasn't as prepared as I normally was. And he stops the lesson and he just says, Alex, um, when you leave this room, I'm your competition. He's like, you want the gigs that I have. And I'm like, well, okay. Well, that kind of puts things into reality for you a little bit, right? So from that time on, I've kind of, put that perspective into kind of mostly everything I do. And it's kind of changed my outlook on things. So anyways.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. We all have these, right? And I'd like to share one too. Gosh, there's so many different ones. But I'll never forget the first time I heard a marimba. Since we're going to be talking about the marimba here today mostly, I thought I would share that. When I first heard the instrument, I couldn't believe that it was capable of making this sound. And I must have, I don't remember specifically, but I must have heard someone play like a chorale or like a 4-part chorale on marimba, roll-wise. And I just couldn't believe that this kind of sound could happen. And so that was one, and we're going to talk about 4-part chorales here in just a second. But that's something that I'll always remember. And oddly enough, I find it strange that in our repertoire, we really don't have these pieces anymore. Rolls in general have been kind of somehow renounced from being used in compositions, especially by players who write for the instrument. So I find that interesting. But anyway, yeah. So I just remember that first experience as being so special to me. So to get things started today, I'd like to let's just get back to our title, right? Finding our innate musicianship. So innate, if we just look at that word, right, it means natural or inborn, right? So what that means is it's something that we already have, right? Each of us already has this. We're born with it. I just love that. Musicianship is defined as our overall skill as a musician, right? These are learned physical skills and knowledge used exceptionally well in performance, right? If we just have to do a couple definitions here. So hopefully we'll get to what some of those are, or might be in a little bit here. So we practice, right? We take classes, we go to concerts, we listen to all kinds of different kinds of music so we can become the best musicians possible to get the gig. And hopefully, we don't want to just get the gig, but we want to have a musical impact as an artist for ourselves and for those listening, right? So we strive to inspire maybe even the next generation of musicians, like our teachers have, like all these stories are reminding us about, or make an impact on our society, right? And I think that's something that artists have sort of always been tasked to do. And we'll get to that here in a little bit more in a second. So music and the arts, right, have this amazing power to affect our society, to communicate something deeper even than words can, especially to help people remember maybe what it means to be human, right? And we think about where people are these days. I think it's pretty urgent, actually. It's always been, but maybe even more so today. So this is what I think might be just at the heart of the matter, right? And I was so happy, actually, to learn of KHS's, this is KHS Majestic's parent company, their core value in regards to music. And it reads this: we believe that music is an essential part of life for every individual, and that it provides a positive contribution to society as a whole. And so when I saw that, I just I was so happy to read that. Because I think it's so important for us as artists to remember that. So then, one of our questions for today is, what is the role of a performer, right? And so I would propose the answer to be something like this: to communicate, right? We have the power to bring music, our music, to life, to bring it to encourage those who listen. And now in this post-pandemic future, right, I'm hoping that it means a reawakening, re-impassioning to this idea, and maybe even a responsibility that more of us would maybe even take that more as a duty, something that we have our purpose to do. So this great pause over the last year and a half or so that we've all experienced together, I'm hoping we all ask the question, how has it changed us? Especially those of us in the arts, in whatever form that we're involved. Maybe it means getting to that heart of the matter here more urgently. Okay. All right. So I know I warned earlier about this getting a little serious, so I apologize about that. As this is where I think as you get older in your career and you start, things become more urgent, and so that's kind of what I'm feeling, especially now. So let's actually take that advice here. Okay. So let's do something with all of this. One of the things I've struggled with as we get back to a more normal kind of life, as musicians, and is balancing the excitement of getting back, right, to doing what we do, to playing live and to going to concerts and to play with other people, and just getting on, with things. So you've got that part, the excitement of that, and then you've got the opposite, right, which is we've lost over 600,000 people to COVID-19, right? And it doesn't, and maybe it's too early for us to really memorialize them, but I don't see a lot of memorialization going on. You know, maybe it's just too soon for that. I don't know. But I really hope as a society we don't forget, right? So that's the full spectrum, right? We've got the hopefulness of what's to come and getting back to doing what we're doing, but also this we've just been through this collective, societal, worldwide mass trauma, right? So, so to start today, I'd just like to offer up something in memory of all those we've lost, to try to live what we're talking about here in a real way. So I'm going to play this piece called molitva, and molitva is a Bulgarian word meaning prayer. And it's something that composer Stephen Barber wrote, who's a film scorer and musician composer who's based in kind of half time between Austin and New York City. And years ago, he heard me play a chorale on a very large marimba for the first time, and he had ever really heard this kind of marimba playing. And he was so enamored with the sound, just like I was in my story I shared with you, that he went home that night and wrote this piece for me. And I didn't even know he was doing this. He called me the next morning, way too early, I'll tell you, and said, "Hey, Tom, I've got this 4-part chorale for you. I wrote it for you." I was like, "You did what? What are you saying?" "Oh yeah, I wrote this piece for you." And so anyway, he sent it to me, and it's really beautiful. It's based on this sort of harmonic language of Eastern Europe. But it's based on the text. Actually, it was written also in another piece of his as a memorial to the people we've lost in 9/11, because it was a little over 20 years ago, or a little under 20 years ago. And so the original version of this music actually had text to it. So I recently got in touch with him. He just sent me the text the other day, because I think I remember hearing that other version of it and thinking it was very meaningful. So I love this idea of connecting to texts, and often find myself very jealous of singers who do this all the time. But I wanted to read the text to you, and then I was going to play the music. And we'll do our own little memorialization here real quick. This is a poem the text written by Robert Astor Kraft. In the hour of deepest sorrow, turning inward in the grieving, we shatter the sky in our anguish, made cruel by our own suffering, our hearts bitter in our mouths. In rising to our better selves, in living the truths of the founding, we shine bright hope in a dark world, and truth may say, Salam. So I'll play this music that goes along with that text here for you. Okay, thanks for going through that with me. It feels a little bit better to move forward after doing that, so thank you. All right, I wanted to go to the other side of the spectrum real quick and just play something more hopeful. Although both these pieces are in C major, this one especially feels to me very hopeful, beautiful. And this, of course, would be Bach's Cello Suite number 3, Prelude. So after we do this, we'll talk a little bit more about sort of what are these foundational elements that we can do as performers, in this case marimba players, that would help our musicianship surface and to find that. But this is Bach's Third Cello Suite Prelude. Purity, joy, beauty, hope. It has all of these things. Hopefully you're able to hear okay.
Tom, fantastic. Really,
Oh, thank you.
really great playing. And I have a question for you, and that is,
Yeah.
As we're talking about, communication and maybe even trying to like find your voice, getting music, um, how you're communicating to others through what you're playing. Are you thinking of something differently from like programmatic music to music that's not, and how does that change your perspective or approach to a piece?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we look at the last two pieces that I played, right, I think those might be good ways to answer that. So in the chorale, actually, that I didn't share this earlier, but that was also something that I mustered up the courage to perform at my father's funeral service. So it has this super deep emotional, I don't know if programmatic's the right word, feeling to it. So, the additional meaning of the text, I went in and wrote text in to where I thought it really made sense, because it was written to that melody. And so I think in that instance, I'm really trying to connect to the text mostly, more than anything. So if there's, sky, is it bright, right? These sort of word plays, how that translates exactly through the music is why we call this art, I guess, right? Because that doesn't really, it doesn't get that specific. But I think it's just the suggestion of it. It's the imagery of it as the performer's playing it, right? The imagination part that can find a way to transmit to the audience. And hopefully some of that happened, to the listeners today. With the Bach, it's really mostly about the brilliance of just the harmonic progressions. It's about showing the voicing. There's so many different ways to play some of these phrases, that I think for me it's in practice time, it's trying to find as many as possible, and then in performance it's trying to somehow communicate, look at the brilliance of this, right? When he hovers over that G pedal for so long, he's kind of laughing at you and showing you how many different ways he can play a chord over that G, right? And so what can we do to kind of imply that as we perform it, right? It's that beautiful, it's just so many chord progressions in there. I'm just trying to find ways to, make them as clear as possible, voicing wise. So it really just depends on the piece, But really it starts with just inhabiting the style of, we're not going to get a chance probably to talk too much about style today, but that's a huge thing for me as a performer, is trying to take the physical qualities of a musical style and put it in here in a meaningful way, controlling my emotions, controlling my tone, my strokes, Maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, but actually then there'll be one other video I want to share later with everyone, I think, that also helps to answer your question. So hopefully that helps. Great question. Thank you so much for that. Okay, can we get into some nitty gritty here, since all of that is kind of like way up here and out there and
Let's do it, man.
All right, excellent. So these are some things in all my years of teaching. I'm about to start my 20th year of teaching at UT, which is kind of blowing my mind. But when we think about the marimba specifically, right, it's so big. It's the physicality of how we play, how we stand, how we move is so, so important. I've heard many non-marimba players, composers, complain about watching marimbas play and how it takes away from the music, because it's just there's so much to see, so much to watch, right? And so I've done a lot of work over the years to try and try and take that aspect away, try to make it look as comfortable as possible, because I think one of the things I get all the time from I love playing for non-percussion audiences, and they always say, you must be really good with chopsticks, right? And I'm like, oh no. And I hate that comment, because that means they're just focusing on this, right? They're not really listening to the music, which is the point, right? So let's talk about some physical things that I do that I hope will help others as we try and minimize just everything we have to do behind the instrument, so people can really focus on what's important, and that's the music you're making, of course. Okay, so how we stand and how we move behind the instrument can certainly be a barrier. I'm going to transition over here. Hopefully you can still hear okay. So I'm going to put a link, let me share this link right now, actually to my 4 mallet exercises. So here's a link to my website where you can just click on this link and feel free to download these exercises. I use these with my students and swear by them. We're not going to get to all of them today, but go ahead and take care of that if you're interested. Let's go over here. So, so if we look at number 1 on that sheet, okay, it's just some fifths that we play up and down the instrument. For my posture, I think marimbas have this big problem of kind of leaning over when they play, right? I'll try to go this way, bending their shoulders over their hips. And this is a real problem because now we can't see your face. You're closing yourself down to the audience, but also sound-wise, when we put the heaviest part of our body is right here, right? And when we lean over like this, it puts us in a very insecure position, and we just can't sound very well. It's also not healthy for us, posture-wise, muscle-wise, injury-wise. So I think I talk a lot about keeping my shoulders right in line with my hips this way. However I move, this always stays aligned, right? It's never going to, it rarely, hopefully, does this, and it's never going to do that or that, right? All aligned. So that's an important thing. So I find that it helps to have the student, or if you're working on these, stand a little closer to the instrument, because I'm a proponent of playing the edges of the bars when we can, so we don't have to reach too far this way. So that's the first thing about the posture that you can work on with this exercise, is just working on keeping these things aligned. When I move left quickly, I'm going to lunge, hopefully you can see this, here and here. Not this way or that way. If any big, on this instrument, which is a smaller 5-octave in general, I can get a full 5-octave by just coming down this way. Shortest distance, right? Straight line, right? This is not a straight line, it's a very curved line. It's also very awkward, okay? So those are some tips about the reaching and the moving around the instrument. So if we just go through a little bit of that first one, we're going to get into sound and stroke here in a little bit, but so here I'm just thinking about the shoulders. I'm thinking about keeping my chin also kind of rotated in this way, so I don't do this, right? Because now that's messing up our shoulder thing. So keep the chin rotated in, and that way you can see what you're doing without bending your whole head down, which is very heavy, especially my head's very big. Hopefully just literally, not figuratively. And then that's the basis of my sound, is having all of that aligned. And then from that sort of core position, I can sound the best I can sound. Okay? Okay. We're going to keep moving here past this one point for the sake of time. But on the outline, there's another link to a video that if you're interested in checking out, you can go watch that and demonstrate some of what I just talked about. Okay. I guess one thing I can talk about real quick before we go on to the next thing is the fourth exercise on that sheet is my arpeggio exercise. And here's where since we talked about how big this thing is in the lunging part of not walking, I'm not going to play these in step. Right? I'm kind of taking all these small steps. I try to avoid that whenever possible. So to do that, I'm going to stay, if I'm going from here to here, I'm going to stay in the middle and just kind of lunge this way, keeping all of this aligned, and stay, and then do one push, one lunge to the right, and lunge back. So stay, push, stay, push. All keys, push, stay, push. All right, so that's a really great exercise to work on avoiding taking too many steps. And if you do all these long enough, over a long period of time to some intensity, you start playing your music with these concepts, right? They start seeping into your repertoire. So you're looking really good forward. You're not moving more than you need to. I try to keep center stage here whenever possible. So as I'm moving, if I'm reaching, it's easy to kick out that left elbow to get to this F sharp, but I don't have to if I'm just hitting one note from there. I can do it this way. Keeping my elbows in is really, really important. All right, so those are some real quick things, but let's move on to developing a personal sound. Part of developing our innate musicianship is developing how I should sound, okay? So, of course, this is a huge topic, and we don't have enough time to get through barely much of it in this kind of situation. but I will go through a couple really big things. I'm going to go through them quickly. And you can always feel free to contact me if you have any more questions about any of these things. Okay, so I encourage my students to develop their own personal sound, right? So here are just a few of the things that I think are really important for each student to discover that for themselves. This is a combined effort between the performer, me in this case, and an instrument, okay? We're in this together, right? So that's something, it sounds kind of really obvious to just say that out loud, but I don't think it's something that enough players think about. So what are the things that I need to do to make this thing sound the best? And what are the things I can learn about this instrument that can make me sound its best, right? So that's really, 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 really important. It's communicating so much to you, and the question is, are we open to listening to that communication, okay? So we'll come back to that. But let's just talk about grip, wrist strokes, and weight strokes. So for me, I can talk a lot about Stephen's grip, but for me, we won't spend too much time on this because we may not have everyone with the same grip here. But for me, Stephen's grip is actually quite simple. You make sounds only two ways. This way with the wrist turn, and this way with the wrist turn. So the wrist is the fulcrum. Okay, avoid having this. I see a lot of this in young players where the mallet's kind of flopping in the back part of the hand. Those back part of the fingers are not capable really of doing any more than just holding it, right? You don't brush your teeth with your pinky or drink your tea with your fourth finger, right? Those are assistive digits. But in this grip, we're giving them a primary function, which is only to hold the mallet still. So when the wrist turns in either direction, there is an immediate response. Okay, so that's a huge problem I see all the time with younger players. Right, so that first exercise I showed you, just work on the wrist. You notice that I really didn't use any arm with that. Okay, that wrist motion is also very difficult. 9 out of 10 of my freshmen that I work with can't do that. They can play all the hard music in the world, but they can't do that. It's the most fundamental things that you learn, that you should know how to do with Stephen's grip. Okay, if we use the arm at all, okay, it's to support the wrist motion. So I have a stroke that I call my weight stroke, which is a way for me to get a lot more sound without too much energy, without too much down speed or velocity on the stroke. All right, I can play a couple things for you here. Because we have this problem with percussion playing. When we play louder, our main way of doing that is to grip something or implement harder and then ripping it, right? And just, speeding it up and tensing it up. And that definitely gets it louder, right? But it also makes it really bright and probably harsh, which may not be a sound we want in every musical situation. So I work a lot on trying to make the biggest sound possible and loudest sound possible, but also the darkest tone possible. And this is something that brass players work on all the time, right? Other musicians work on this from the very beginning. Right? You know what a trumpet or trombone sounds like, or a low brass instrument, especially when they blow too much air through the horn. It sounds terrible, right? The better ones know how to control their embouchure to protect that tone when it is loud. What is that for us? We don't really talk about this in keyboard playing really specifically, and we all do in slightly different forms, but for me it's about harnessing weight. So I'm just going to play 4 strokes for you, 4 regular wrist strokes that are just turning the wrist, and then 4 weight strokes, okay? And then just kind of listen carefully. Hopefully you've got some good implements so you can hear whatever difference there might be. Try it a little lower. So normally in this time, I would spend some time just talking to everybody about what they're hearing. If anybody has anything they want to share really quick, I'm happy to listen. But to me, the difference isn't really volume, right? I just was trying not to make one louder than the other. And that's interesting, right? Because I think that's how we kind of differentiate our marimba sounds, is, oh, that's louder, that's softer. But actually they're quite different the way that I hear it, even though they're kind of the same volume. The second one seems to have more of a crescendo. It draws more attention to the middle of the note, whereas the first one has more of like all the energies at the beginning of the note. That's one way I like to hear the differences. Now I can certainly play that second one louder, and I often do, but that was actually my primary goal in trying to learn this technique, was to be able to do that. But what I figured out was that envelope of sound is very different. So I'll just do that one more time for you so you can hear. So again, the first one, the sound wave sort of has all this energy at the beginning and dies away. And the second one sort of crescendos a little bit, drawing attention to the middle of the note, which, by the way, for especially in Bach playing, like it's pretty handy to be able to draw attention to the middle of a note, right? And the other cool thing about this concept is I'm separating the attack from the resonance of the sound, right? Which is also something very interesting. So anyway, here's just a couple of those sounds again. So. Can you hear those differences I'm describing? Yeah. So for me, this is a huge part of how I sound the way I do. And, you know, I think about all the other players that I grew up listening to, Gordon Stout, Nancy Zeltzman, Lee Howard Stevens, all these players. I could tell you what they sounded like if I was just listening to them, right? They have such a unique sound that I could tell you, oh yeah, I know who that is, I know who that is, I know who that is. And I think that's all very, very important to be able to develop. So that's just a quick thing. I can talk about that for hours and hours, but we need to move on here. The second part of this is keep hammers low. Someone in this audience knows who said that previously, about over 100 years ago probably, is George Hamilton Green, of course, who would say, keep your hammers low. That's the other nice thing about this weight transfer technique is when we play from a higher height, we have to swing faster, and that's going to brighten our sound, right? So if we can find power from somewhere else instead of stick speed, which was the whole point of that weight stroke concept, then we can keep our sound nice and warm, but also quite big and louder, okay? And also keeping hammers low, keeping our sticks low, works on the second part of accuracy for me, which is hit the right note, but hit the right spot on that note. That's so, so important. The higher we play off the keyboard, the less likely both of those will happen, especially the second. If I hit a different spot on a scale on every note, then there's a different timbre for every note, and I don't hear that as a phrase, which is a phrase we could sort of quickly define as just a group of notes strung together as one. Okay, and then of course mallets. I am using my Thomas Burritt IP mallets, which by design have a softer yarn, because I'm not interested in having a whole lot of attack normally, especially with the kind of pieces I play today behind the instrument. Percussionists, that's our calling card in most situations, right, is the attack of something. But to me, I don't usually want that behind the instrument. Okay, I've found that when I can take the attention off of the attack, I'm more apt to listen as the listener to the body of the sound. So that's why I use mallets with very soft yarn. That's one reason, because I'm interested in, because I have to strike it, there is going to be some attack, but I'm interested in minimizing that. Okay, and I think these are actually unique. There's not a lot of mallets that actually will do that for the listener. And then the other thing that this is important to my sound and always has been, I think, is this idea of an acrylic versus a rubber core. Right, a rubber core is going to give you one kind of sound, a very good fundamental, deep, dark. It's a beautiful sound. But especially with yarn that's hard or tightly wound around the rubber, that's the only sound you can make from a timbre color perspective, right? Using an acrylic core, which is what the core in my mallets are, I can brighten or darken the sound if I want to. So here's a slightly harder 3. It has a nice kind of sound just as it is, but it gets brighter as I grip the stick and push into it a little bit more. Hopefully you can hear that. Sorry if it's peeking at the mic. But if I relax on it, then it stays that darker, nicer tone. If I grip a little bit more, I can get that brighter sound from something. And I equate this to what most other musicians have the ability to. If you take strings, for example, do string players only use one bow speed? No. When they play, do they only use one bow pressure? Nope. What happens when they dig into that string? Well, it gets a little grittier, right? It gets a little harsher. It gets a little bit more something on it, right? And what are these things for us as we build phrases and play musically and do all these things that we want to be able to do? And so that's where the mallet really comes in. So all of that super, super quick. Let's talk about the instrument, because that's, like we said earlier in the session, this is a two-way street here, right? We focused the last 10 minutes or so on things that I can do on the performer side, but what about the instrument, okay? So I think when we talk about this, it's really about, one thing I love about the marimba so much is that it's so resonant and it has so much to express, right? These sound waves coming from the instrument, it's sort of like playing timpani, and I've heard a lot of timpanists say this too. There's so much sound coming from the drums and from the instrument that it's just, you can really feel it, right? And I think there's so much we can really learn from just kind of I think we all know this, but we don't maybe all remember to really feel these sound waves and what does it feel like. I equate it to a loud sound that happens, some rim shot and a snare drum that you're not expecting. Your eye blinks, right? You didn't tell your eyes to blink, but your eye was literally thinking it was under attack from that sound wave, right? It didn't really affect the rest of your body because the rest of your body knows, oh, that's not going to hurt me. But your eyes are like, oh, right? So that's what's coming at your body every time you make a sound. And by the way, a lot of what we've been talking about isn't just marimba, right? These are concepts that really affect all percussion playing to a greater or lesser extent. But if we think about the exercise I just played between the wave stroke and the normal stroke, there's a big difference in the way the sound waves are hitting my body between the two of those. And so as I'm making sounds, I imagine it here in my head first, and I know exactly what kind of motion I need to make that happen, how much grip I need, where I'm striking the instrument, what kind of follow through it needs, and then the last part of it is I already know exactly what the sound wave is going to feel like as it hits my body, right? And I think that's something, once we're really open to that, it really opens some new doors from a sound perspective when we're open to that. So find an instrument that speaks to you in that way. Find an instrument that really is open in that way to you. Okay, yeah, that's good. Fully explore what the instrument is capable of. I've come to really love this particular instrument. This is a Majestic Reflection, a pretty new instrument from Majestic. And to me, it has just a super sweet character tone to it in general. It reminds me a little bit of the action of the Mustard 250, so the action is really, really quick. It's not an instrument that I could maybe play as big or heavy on as like the previous model that they had, because those bars were much heavier and thicker. I take into that account, right, as I'm playing and getting to know an instrument. Where is that? How much is it capable of? So this one's a little bit more. It doesn't have as huge of a big side of it, but it's got a much more nuanced, touchy side of it because the bars aren't so thick and they have such a quick response. Okay. The other thing that I personally love about this instrument are the resonator caps that make all these resonators tunable. And really, all that really means, there's all this mysticism about this concept, but all it means is I can make every bar ring the fullest extent possible. Okay, I haven't tuned this up. It's getting warmer in here because I had to turn my AC off. But you can hear a natural decay to each bar. Now, if I take this C and I move the cap just a little, it thins up a lot. Right? If I blow into that, can you hear that's a little sharp? Right? So I drop it and you'll hear it come into focus. Now you hear it shut down all of a sudden? Right? It suddenly shuts down. I don't like that. We're close, but I can even that out just by pulling it just a little bit down. Here we go. Okay? So yeah, that's super geeky. I get it. But now I can make every chord, all three notes, dissipate evenly. And if you go to a marimba that doesn't have this capability, there's no way for the factory to put the cap exactly in the right spot for every humidity. It's just not possible. So, and sometimes they put them way off, and then you can't do anything about it. So, I love that part of the instrument here because I'm just interested in maximizing the instrument's capabilities. Okay. All right. There's a lot more we can talk about the instrument, but let's move on. I want to share a video here. We have time here. Let's see. I'm not sure we have time to see this whole thing. Why don't we? Let's see. Do we have any questions? Yes, Laura. How are you?
Hi, so I don't play marimba. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
But I play in a gamelan group and we use mallets. So my question is, and maybe you approach this, but I just want to hear it again then. Like, is it better? I mean, someone said, like, if we're playing something really fast, like a tremolo, let's say, it's better to keep your hands this way because it's this way. I don't remember why. It's heavier this way, and you can't go as fast because of gravity somehow pulling you downwards. Is that right? Like, could you just talk about that a little bit? Like,
yeah, sure. Yeah, I think I understand what you're asking about.
Like which way your hands are facing.
Yeah,
Is it sideways more like that?
Yeah, right.
That's a lighter thing than if it's going down that way.
Sure. Yeah, being unfamiliar with the actual technique you're using, as far as how you're holding the mallets you're using, but like, this reminds me. Yeah. Okay. So that looks to me
versus right. That.
Right. So we talk about this as timpanists. Actually, we also talk about this as keyboard players too, to be honest. Because actually the two main grips, since we're talking marimba here, two main grips, 4 mallet grips that you see out there, at least with modern music on marimba, is what we call the cross grip here, or a traditional grip, where the sticks are crossed in the hand. That's more of a hands on top. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Right? So that's more of this way, right? The way I play with the Stevens grip, it's actually more like maybe what you're describing, where the hands are kind of this sideways, this way, right? So this also happens a lot. These are the two main ways that we play timpani. We call German grip this sort of hands over grip when we play timpani, and we call French grip sort of the palms underneath the stick, right? And you'll have, of course, each one says theirs is better, but I do like this idea of the hand in this instance, and probably in the gamelan instance too, because you're playing. A melodic instrument, essentially, right? You're playing something that's resonating quite a bit.
Like metallophones. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Having the hand underneath the stick, I think, can be beneficial for sure.
This kind, this sideways kind of.
Yeah, and I think mainly as it gets the hand out of the way, and like you referenced this already, I think, in your earlier comment, but it gets the hand a little bit more out of the way, right? As opposed to over the top. I think really both could work very. Go ahead.
If you were playing like a drum, like let's say a djembe, I don't have one right now, but like would you also, if you were doing a tremolo, play more to the side rather than straight down with your palm facing down?
Yeah, probably not in that instance. I think it mostly has to do with a mallet thing, right? It's whether you're holding timpani mallets or your mallets or a keyboard mallet, just something that has a lot of resonance to it. And also it depends on the technique. So a snare drum, we really can't play like this because we need this kind of energy to make a multiple bounce roll. We need this kind of energy to do that because the technique is just different. It's very difficult to do a clean roll because there's not enough energy holding the stick this way to create multiple bounces in each hand. So it probably does differ, based on the technique for each instrument. But I think anything melodic, I think you're on the right track.
With mallets, yeah.
Yeah. I hope that makes sense. It's a little tricky. That's why it's one of the reasons why timpani, you don't need to do any multiple bounce rolls with it because there's so much resonance coming from the instrument already, right? So, yeah. Thank you for that question, Laura. Appreciate that. Any other questions from anyone out there? Great. I'm going Before the session's out, I will drop the links to those 2 other examples in the chat for you. And these are videos I've made not too long ago that I think demonstrate a lot of what we talked about today. The grip, the stroke, the weight stroke, and then kind of circling back to kind of where we started today and communicating. Hopefully you could see as we finish up today some of the concepts that I presented to you and how they might aid in communicating, right? An idea, a style, right, to the audience. And isolating barriers, getting those. I think for my students, really I'm looking for things that won't allow their innate musicianship to surface, right? Posture is one we talked about. There are many others, tension in playing, their technical facility, all these things. And I know my students are making progress because I get to know them so intimately with lessons and so well. It's really hard to see them graduate. But when they're playing, when I start seeing their natural sort of personality come through and they're performing and they're playing, that's when I know we're making progress, because there's no difference between the way they talk to me in lessons and the way we just hang out and talk about things to the way that they actually play. Yeah. Great. If there's no other questions, we can just close with a couple other ideas that can help us, I think, finish this idea of developing our musicianship. Think like a musician, right? This sounds like a stupid thing for me to say, but I think as drummers and percussionists, we might be guilty to stay away from absolutes here, but we might be guilty of just thinking like that way, thinking like a drummer would, or a percussionist would, or a marimbist would, or a timpanist would, right? When we talked about the trumpet player or the brass player who spend so much time strengthening their embouchure, right, to protect their tone, what is that equivalent for us, right? Can we protect our tone? Every crescendo we make, does that also get brighter and harsher, right? That's probably not a good thing, right? Doesn't mean we can't use that sound, but can we also make a crescendo without playing too harsh, right? Because that's what most other musicians all work on doing. And so how do we do that? We also talked about, let's see, you saw, I don't know if you looked at some of my stickings that I used in the Bach today. I equate some of those two groupings of notes, right? If I play Bach for you, you're not going to ever see me just use the inner 2 mallets and only use the outer 2 mallets for chords, which is the most common way, by the way, of playing violin or cello music. So if I play, and this is really a big can of worms I don't want to get in too far with right now, but it really has to do with articulation. So for example, this beautiful phrase, those stickings are all designed to show you the chord changes, right? So these motions are all hopefully helping you. This is just one chord, right? Scale, next chord with the same sticking, and so on. And so on, right? And so I could do that in a different way, right? Something like that, and it wouldn't come across visually is in sync with what the music is actually doing, right? And so that's kind of an articulation thing. Thinking of grouping with mallets more like a bow, like a bow would be. How many notes am I playing with a single bow motion, right? Those sorts of things. Articulation too. What is a slur for us? I think this is a huge thing for me. If you told any of your musician friends that play any other instrument that they couldn't use articulation today at all, what would they say to you? They would say you're crazy, right? Forget it, right? But what is articulation to the marimbist, right? How do we slur a note? If I want to slur those 2 notes, we're taught, I think, a lot as percussionists to lift after every note. What does that imply on the marimba? That implies shortness to me, right? Right? But what if I showed you a slur this way? Is that more like it? the A flat just a little bit louder, I can fool you, right? And the fact those two notes are connected, right? So that's something I use a lot. That didn't really come up in what I was playing with today, but if you watch a few of the videos that I'll pop in the chat, you'll see a lot of that. And the other videos I have on my YouTube channel also, hopefully you'll see some of that too. So these are some of the things I've been fascinated with and continue to learn. Because, the bottom line here, everybody, is that as percussionists, we're really, marimbas especially, we're babies when you compare ourselves pedagogically to other instruments, right? We're like 40 years, 50 years maybe. I mean, I was like 7, 8 years old when Lee Stevens came up with this grip. That wasn't that long ago. You compare ourselves to these couple hundred years of piano, violin, all these other instruments, right? So there's just so much we don't know yet. A couple last things here. Listen to the right players. There's so many videos out there of great playing, but it's not all great playing, right? So, back in my day, I'm going to sound like an old man, I had to go a long way and maybe in hopes of finding a recording. But if I did find one, it was really good because someone said so. Someone who really knew what they were talking about said, this is a great recording. Now you have the opposite problem. You can get 1 million recordings, but which ones are good? That's the trick, right? And then styles of music. One of the things I've learned more recently is I'm convinced that we need to stop sectionalizing styles of music and declaring one better than another, thinking one's more legitimate than another. To me, I'm not interested in that at all. And I think the more we listen to different kinds of styles of music, different genres, different things maybe that I just think that's something that I hope we can, coming out of this pandemic, we can sort of take a look at, right? Back in the day when we used to go to the record stores and you had every genre under the sun totally separated. I can see why that might help. But I think a lot of us in percussion land are very, have a hard time with this concept, right? This is what we like, and this is the only thing that's good. And I think the sky is way too big in this thing we call music to really have that perspective. And so we're excited at the Percussion Ensemble at UT to be performing at PASIC this year. So if you happen to be at the conference, we're going to really try and bear that new little thing out there about styles. Last thing, and we'll say goodbye, is don't get distracted. Don't forget why you love doing what you're doing, why you showed up today to even listen to anything that I have to say, right? Why you joined the Gamelan Ensemble, Laura. It's so easy to get distracted, especially those of us who are really trying to make a living doing it, or in school, in the academic setting, for example. Try and always remember why it is we're doing what we're doing here. And hopefully we got into some of those reasons today.
Is the music available for the first piece you played?
Yeah, actually I recorded it. Stay tuned. I'm recording it video. I'm doing a video recording of it in early August. So, yes, and we're going to work the text into that. So that'll be available.
Is the score
on YouTube.
available also? Is the score for it available, or is it just written for you?
I can contact me and I'd be happy to share it with you. It's not published officially, but I'm happy to get it to you. If you just send me an email, I'd be happy to send it to you. Yeah, but stay tuned. I'm about to do a lot of recording. And hopefully by the end of August or early September, we'll have some new videos out that hopefully do a little bit of what we did today and sort of show you some other things too. Thank you, Laura.
Well, Tom, it was great. It was great having you today. And, it was really, I thoroughly enjoyed you talking about being the whole musician and not just, not just working on one facet, right? I mean, so often we, sit in a practice room and just work on that method book, right? To try to do that one thing. And there's a lot of other things that really, as you showcased today, that goes into making a great musician, a holistic musician, and not one who can just, play the most chops, right? So,
Yes.
Yeah. And don't we, as percussionists, I almost said drummers, but no, as percussionists that's sometimes we get pigeonholed into that. So I really appreciated your comments on, talking through programmatic music and how to take your musicianship and communicate with others through that. So that's, and we don't talk about that enough as percussionists. I remember one of my teachers saying, as I'm working on some drum set stuff, you have to play your solos melodically. And I was like, what do you mean melodically, man? These are drums, dude. We hit them. And I was like, oh, no, that's not what we do. So it's definitely
that's the classic kind of, like in our brains, we like we sectionalize these things but really, like, we as percussionists, we're constantly in new situations, like having to learn all these instruments and how do we handle all of this stuff. This is how, when you don't sectionalize, when you just try to be the musician you are behind whatever it is you're playing, right?
Absolutely.
And not try and sectionalize too much. And it sounds like easy for me to say, and how does that all work? And I get it, it's very out there and kind of esoteric. But it's a perspective that, I think is so important. And it's part of that not losing our way thing, right? Not getting distracted, not getting too pigeonholed, not just doing one thing. It's kind of like the orchestral percussionist maybe that wins the job out of 200 people, but only practiced how to win the gig and now has no idea how to play with the orchestra and can't keep that gig.
Right.
Right? It's that same kind of thing. And it's really hard because you got to do both kinds of work here, right? But really, whenever we just do one and not the other, we get ourselves in a little bit of trouble. So.
Completely agree. Well, again, thank you to you. Thank you to our friends at Majestic. Without them, none of this would be possible. And then, of course, we put some links in the chat. We have recorded this. So we'll make sure that we get the recording out to everyone. And it does go up on our Masterclass channel at westmusic.com. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. And with that, we'll go ahead and release you, and have a great rest of your Wednesday, and look forward to more masterclasses coming soon. So Tom, again, thank you, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, everyone.